Commands are a kind of modal spell that were originally introduced in 2007's Lorwyn, where we were given a cycle of commands, one for each color. Each of these was an instant or sorcery that gave you 4 options, and from those 4, you get to choose 2. Since Lorwyn, we've seen several more cycles of commands, as well as a few standalone commands, and they all follow the model established back in 2007. Overall, these spells tend to be pretty powerful. Well before commands were ever a thing, Charms had established that even just getting one choice out of 3 was pretty good, and in many ways, commands upped the ante. One of the things that makes a Magic card good is that there are a wide variety of situations in which the card can do something meaningful, and it's pretty hard not to meet that threshold with a command, since they give you so many choices. This list is very stacked for covering such a small number of cards, with the top 6 all having 65 or more points, and the top 4 having more than 100. In all, there are 22 commands in Magic, and of those, 18 of them have top 8'd at least one major event, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. I use a scoring system where cards are rewarded 2 points for a first tier top 8, this includes events like Pro Tours, and 1 point for a second tier top 8, this includes events like Regional Championships. At number 10, it's Primal Command. Part of the original cycle of Lorwyn commands, it's 3 generic and 2 green for a sorcery, and its 4 options are: target player gains 7 life, put target non-creature permanent on top of its owner's library, target player shuffles their graveyard into their library, or you can tutor up a creature and put it into your hand. While none of these have a massive impact on the board, if you choose to put a non-creature permanent on top of its owner's library and tutor up your best creature, we're talking about a pretty powerful 2-for-1, since you're able to make your opponent redraw a land or something, making it more likely you'll get to untap and slam your best creature on the board on the next turn. And if you're in a spot where you can't afford to choose both of those because there's too much pressure, gaining 7 life is likely to help you make it to your next turn to take advantage of you tutoring up the best creature in your deck. The graveyard mode is definitely useful the least often, but it does also mean this command can function as graveyard hate, or even keep you from milling out. Primal Command was featured in a variety of green decks in Block Standard and Extended between 2007 and 2011, and it was usually played in decks that could produce lots of mana, as the command is certainly better if you can cast it on turn 3 or 4. A lot of these decks also ran a bit of a toolbox, in other words, singleton copies of creatures that you could grab with the command. Lots of black-green decks, for example, had a singleton Shriek Maw, and that basically meant you could also tutor up removal with Primal Command. Primal Command has largely been inactive since 2011, the one exception being a modern top 8 in 2015 in a Primeval Titan ramp deck. Unfortunately, Primal Command's place on this list is under siege because Kozilek's command, which was just printed earlier this year, already has 17 points, and it's likely to surpass Primal Command by the end of the year at the latest. At number 9, it's Profane Command, another one of the Lorwyn commands. For X and 2 black, it's a sorcery that gives you the following choices. Target player loses X life, reanimate a creature with mana value X from your graveyard, target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, or up to X target creatures gain fear until end of turn. Profane Command is really good at finishing off an opponent. If you choose to make your opponent lose life and give your board fear, there's a pretty good chance your opponent is dead, and if you're not in a spot to make that happen, the other 2 modes are pretty good when you're behind, since you can remove a creature and or reanimate one of your own. It was heavily played in both Block and Standard and was fairly successful in Extended too. In all of those formats, it was frequently featured in Doran and Elf decks. Both of these were decks that could do lots of damage early, and Profane Command was good at letting you punch through for lethal. However, Profane Command hasn't gained any points since 2009, and there's a good chance that a future command, or Kozilek's command, will displace it. At number 8, it's Atarka's command. It was part of the second cycle of commands, which are from 2015's Dragons of Tarkir. And that said, each dragon leader got a command, which meant we got one for each of the allied color pairs. For a red and a green, Atarka's command is an instant, and it gives you the following choices. Your opponent can't gain life this turn, it deals 3 damage to each opponent, you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield, or creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain reach until end of turn. This is a very aggressive command. At only 2 mana, it can make your board lethal out of nowhere, with the most frequent choices being the mass pump effect and the bolt to your opponent's face. But aggro decks also never hate having a way to shut off life gain, and sometimes putting an extra land in play might let you go off a turn earlier. Atarka's Command has been played in Gruul aggro decks in Standard, Pioneer, and Modern, and it's still putting up top finishes in Pioneer right now. At number 7, it's Ojutai's Command, another Tarkir command. It's an instant that costs 2 generic, a white, and a blue, and it gives you the following choices. Reanimate a 2 mana value or less creature from your graveyard, gain 4 life, counter target creature spell, or draw a card. Ojutai's Command gives you lots of ways to get 2-for-1s, and probably the sweetest thing you can do with it is counter a creature spell and reanimate a small creature from your graveyard, since that lets you prevent your opponent from adding to the board while you do add something to it. But drawing a card and countering or reanimating something feels pretty good too. The gain 4 life option is the kind of thing you'll only choose if you desperately need to stabilize, but it's nice to have it when you really need it. It was heavily played in Standard, where it appeared in a lot of control and mid-range decks. It was also pretty great in Collected Company decks, since you could pass a turn with 4 mana up, and if your opponent played something you could counter, you could get your 2-for-1, and if they didn't, well, you could just cast Collected Company and get your 2-for-1. It saw a bit of play in Blue-White Spirits decks in Pioneer back in 2020, but it hasn't put up any top finishes since then, so there's a good chance Atarka's Command passes it in the future. At number 6, it's Gix's Command. The newest command on the list. It's part of a cycle of monocolored commands that were released in 2022's The Brothers' War. Each of them features a major character from the lore of Dominaria. For 3 generic and 2 black, it's a sorcery, and here are your choices. You put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature and it gains lifelink until end of turn. You can destroy each creature with power 2 or less. You can return 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, or each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. That last mode is a pretty good removal spell that will usually get rid of your opponent's best creature, and you're also usually likely to have something to put the counters on, and that lifelink is going to really shift a race in your favor. The other 2 modes are certainly more situational, but if you've got creatures in your graveyard, getting 2 back is a big deal, and if your opponent has a bunch of small creatures, wiping their board is really powerful. The command sees about an equal amount of sideboard and main deck play in Standard, as it's particularly good against the format's aggro decks, as wiping away their creatures and gaining a bunch of life is pretty insurmountable for them. But the decks that have played it in the main deck have typically been Golgari Aggro and Esper Raffine, both of which have a hefty graveyard theme, allowing the deck to take advantage of the recursive effect on a regular basis. While Raffine has rotated out of the format, Golgari aggro decks haven't, and Gix's Command is likely to continue to see main deck play in those decks, and sideboard play in many other black decks in the format, so it's likely to add to its score, but all the commands in front of it are pretty active too. At number 5, it's Witherbloom Command. It's part of a cycle of commands from 2021's Strixhaven, with each of the different colleges of Strixhaven getting their own command, and that means it's a cycle of enemy-colored, multicolored commands. For 1 black and a green, it's a sorcery, and you have the following choices. Target player mills 3, and then you return a land from your graveyard to your hand. Destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. Target creature gets -3/-1 until end of turn, or you can drain 2 life. Tied with Atarka's and Dromoka's command for the cheapest commands we've ever seen, it doesn't really have the capacity to have a massive impact on the board, but it's also not very hard to get 2 mana or more worth of value out of it. If you have a good target for the non-creature, non-land permanent mode and the -3/-1 mode, it can feel particularly insane since you remove 2 things for 2 mana, but having that lineup is far from certain, so it's nice that you can always choose the mill effect and draw a land and drain 2 life from your opponent. The command has thrived especially in graveyard decks in multiple formats, since the first mode results in at least 3 cards going into the graveyard, so if you have other ways to take advantage of a well-stocked graveyard, it gets a lot better. It only saw a bit of play in Standard, but it's found significant success in all of the non-rotating 60-card formats. In Pioneer, it's been played in Greasefang Parhelion decks, which are all about using Greasefang to reanimate huge scary vehicles like Parhelion, and Witherbloom Command is good at making sure you have a nice vehicle in the graveyard. It sees more sporadic play in Modern, where it's occasionally featured in the Rock, and in Legacy and Vintage, it sees play in Sultai mid-range decks, which often use Murktide Regent, a card that needs lots of cards in the graveyard to really go off. Witherbloom Command is going to keep putting up points in Pioneer and Legacy going forward. At number 4, it's Prismari Command, another Strixhaven command. It's an instant for 1 generic, a blue, and a red, and these are your options. You can do 2 damage to any target, you can have target player draw 2 and discard 2, you can make a treasure token, or you can destroy an artifact. One of the easiest ways to tell that a command is good is if you only ever got 2 of the effects and had no other options, it would still be a good card, and that's definitely what you have here. If this was only ever a 3-mana deal 2 with Faithless Looting stapled to it, it'd be a good card. Those effects usually let you remove something small while digging deep in your deck. And of course, running this command also means you have Artifact Hate in your main deck, and you can ramp and fix your mana in a pinch too. Prismari command has seen a lot of play in 60-card formats. In Standard it was played primarily in Control decks, in Pioneer it's seen the most play in Arclight Phoenix decks. As I already noted, this command is good in a vacuum, but if you have a deck that likes the graveyard and casting spells, Prismari command is even better, and Arclight Phoenix decks are all about both of those things. In Modern, most of its points have come in Indomitable Creativity decks, which are all about casting creativity, targeting a token or tokens, at which point you cheat a huge creature into play because you don't have any creatures in your deck apart from something like Atraxa. Prismari command is extra good there because it can make a token you can target and help you dig deeper to find creativity. It's likely to continue racking up points in both Pioneer and Modern, and it's likely to eventually catch up to the number 3 card, which has largely been inactive for a while, and that card is Dromoka's Command, the first Tarkir command we've seen in quite some time. For a green and a white, it's an instant, and here are your choices. You can prevent all damage that an instant or sorcery spell would do. You can make a player sacrifice an enchantment. You can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, or you can have one of your creatures fight an opponent's creature. This is a command where you frequently choose only 2 of the options, the +1/+1 counter and the fight effect. Those 2 combine to make for a powerful removal spell, and if combat lines up just right, you can even turn that into a 2-for-1. But when the other 2 modes are good, they can be great. Enchantment Hate is always welcome on a card that's already good, and being able to blank a removal spell that might kill a creature or you is sometimes pretty important. While in Standard, Dromoka's Command was a format-defining card, as it was one of the most played cards in the entire format. It had no problem transitioning to new decks as others rotated out. In its early days, it was mostly featured in Abzan, but then it moved on to Megamorph, Green-White tokens, and Collected Company. It actually got to the point where it was super tough to just play enchantments in that Standard, because so many decks were playing a card with Incidental Hate. After rotating out of Standard, though, things really slowed down for the command. It found a bit of success in Pioneer and Modern, but then went idle for several years. But starting in 2021, it found a new home in Modern, 5-color domain decks. These decks have excellent mana, so casting the command is fairly easy, and right now Modern has lots of enchantments worth hating on, like Underworld Breach, Leyline Binding, and Leyline of the Guild Pact, so that mode is actually chosen quite often. Dromoka's Command is likely to keep gaining points in Modern going forward, but it does feel like Prismari Command is going to catch it in the future. At number 2, it's Kolaghan's Command, our second consecutive Tarkir command, and the 4th from that cycle in this list overall, which makes that cycle the most successful. Anyway, for 1 generic, a black and a red, it's an instant with the following options. You can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, you can make a player discard a card, you can destroy an artifact, or you can do 2 damage to target creature or player. One of the great things about this command is that no matter which 2 modes you choose, you get a 2-for-1. The deal 2 and discard effect is virtually always going to give you lots of value, so the artifact removal and raised dead options are good additional options. This power has led to the command seeing play in multiple formats. In Standard it was played in a pretty wide variety of decks. This included more aggressive decks as well as control decks. It's found the most success in Modern, finding its way into most decks that are playing both black and red. This has included combo decks like Splinter Twin and Living End, mid-range decks like Jund, control decks like Grixis, and aggro decks like Death's Shadow. There's not really a good reason not to have a Kolaghan's Command or 2 in your 75 in Modern. It has also found success in Legacy, where it's been featured in Delver and 4-color control. The creation of the Pioneer format has been great for this command too, where it just might be one of the most powerful instants in the entire format. Kolaghan's Command is still racking up tons of points in multiple formats, and it has a very good chance at one day catching the number 1 card on this list. For now though, that card is Cryptic Command. For many players, this is probably the first card you think of when you think of commands. After all, it's one of the original commands from Lorwyn, and over the years it's been heavily played in 60-card formats and Commander. For 1 generic and 3 blue, it's an instant with the following choices: counter target spell, bounce a permanent, tap all opposing creatures, or draw a card. It isn't hard to set up a 2-for-1 with this one either, as just choosing the counter target spell and draw a card option will guarantee you one of those. The counter draw card option may be the most common, but the other options have their place too. Tapping down an opponent's board can find you lethal out of nowhere, and the bounce is surprisingly flexible. For one thing, it can bounce lands, unlike most versions of this effect. So yeah, this offers a lot of power and flexibility. The one downside about this command is the triple blue in the mana cost, so it doesn't find its way into all control decks in a format like Modern, but any control deck that can play it in Modern does, and that's a big part of what makes its score so huge. In 2021, it helped lead to the ban of Mystic Sanctuary, because combined with Cryptic Command, it created something of a soft lock. If you cast the command with Mystic Sanctuary in play, and you use one of the modes to bounce the Sanctuary, and then use the other mode to draw a card or counter a spell, you could later play the Sanctuary to get the command back on top of your library. This created a very strong advantage for control decks in Modern, and since the banning and the release of Modern Horizons 2, the command has really slowed down in the format. So while it holds the #1 spot for now, it does seem likely that Kolaghan's command will surpass it in the future. So, those are the best commands in Magic the Gathering. If you like casting spells that let you choose 2 options from a menu of 4, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in this video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more that look at modal spells like Charms, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.